Since 2012, Syrian peace talks have been associated and named after the cities they've been held in: Astana, Geneva, Sochi. Warring sides have taken to neutral ground to find a solution, but peace remained elusive. On Wednesday, Geneva hosted opposite sides in the Syrian conflict. These included a fractured opposition and a delegation from Bashar al-Assad's regime. Sochi, where talks wrapped up last week, saw Russia, Turkey and Iran come together. A lot was discussed, from Bashar al-Assad's future to the Syrian opposition groups that will be allowed to attend future peace talks. But for Turkey, one issue in particular was of particular importance: the PKK terror group linked YPG in Afrin. It's a landlocked area in northwestern Syria where Russian military observers are also present. Turkey, which recently sent troops to neighboring Idlib, insists the YPG is unacceptable in Afrin. The group has received US aid, training and air support in its fight against Daesh. Ankara has warned for months and again this week of a potential military operation to clear Afrin of YPG. And now with the Sochi talks laying the framework for a wider peace conference to bring all of Syria's warring sides together, officials in Ankara want their Russian and Iranian partners to provide a clear roadmap on YPG in Afrin. And to discuss this further, I'm joined in the studio by Timur Akhmetov. He's an analyst at the Russian International Affairs Council, and by Huseyin Alptekin. He's a professor of international relations at Istanbul Sehir University. There's so many moving parts to this. It's between Sochi, Geneva, between Assad and the Turks, the Russians and the Iranians. What's actually going on in your mind, Timur? Let's begin with you.
I think that after the defeat of the ISS, we can see that Russia is intensifying diplomatic efforts to bring forward the conflict into the political and diplomatic dimension. So it basically tries to finish the military dimension of the conflict, and that's why it brings in the negotiations Turkey and Iran, main regional actors. And by doing this, actually, Russia is trying to increase its diplomatic stance vis-a-vis United States.
So, Sen, is it like an exchange between Turkey and Russia that you can take on the YPG in Afrin as long as we get to keep Assad in power in Damascus?
It has some truthfulness in that, but it's not that simple. It's not like give YPG and take Assad. It's not that simple. But there's some part of truth in that depiction. So on the one hand, now Turkey's primary concern in Syria is the growing influence of the YPG, the PKK affiliated group in Syria. And that's number one security threat for Turkish national interest. So of course, Turkey's primary concern now is about the future of the YPG, and it's about the security of its borders with Syria.
Who has more of Assad's back, Russia or Iran?
I think both countries are interested in keeping currently Assad in power, but we have to understand that Russian interest is not in keeping Assad in power forever. Ultimate interest of Russia is in keeping central government in power. So it's legitimate, yes, legitimate, be it with Assad or without Assad. The main problem that Syrian government should go on without any intervention from outside. This was the ultimate objective of the Syrian campaign of Russia.
So you're saying Russia is willing to sacrifice Assad, or will be okay if he's not there, but will Iran be all right with such a situation?
It's such a critical question. I don't have any direct, clear answers to this, but according to the Russian official statements, they were not hanging on to Assad. The main priority was the Syrian government, not Assad.
Hussein, Russia willing to sacrifice Assad, is Iran willing to do so, or might be? According to Timur, you know what? It's not about one man, it's about the sustainability of the regime beyond or despite Assad.
So what we know is Russia won't sacrifice its military bases, its influence and its indirect control in Syria. And now the most useful instrument for such a direct influence in Syria is Bashar al-Assad. So there is no substitute for now. So I don't see Russia will sacrifice Assad in the foreseeable future. But for Iran, the ties are even tighter. So Iran is way more pro-Assad than Russia. Russia thinks Assad is a useful Assad because through Assad, Russia can control the territory.
I just want to cut you short. We've spoken so much about Russia and Iran and the YPG. We're not talking about one very significant player in all of this. The Americans and their thing about cutting the funding or cutting funding to the YPG. Let's listen to what the Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu had to say about what he said was the US cutting funds to the YPG.
Ve Sayın Trump da
President Trump has clearly stated that he has given instructions and that from now on, the YPG will not be provided with weapons and that this nonsense should have ended much earlier.
So that was Mevlut Çavuşoğlu saying that he expected that President Trump was very clear in cutting funding to the YPG. But let's listen to what the White House then said and Sarah Huckabee Sanders said about the same issue.
Once we started winning the campaign against ISIS, the plan and part of the process is to always wind down support for certain groups. Now that we're continuing to crush the physical caliphate, that we're in a position to stop providing military equipment to certain groups, but that doesn't mean stopping all support of those individual groups.
So two different opinions from Turkey and the US on the same issue. Let's begin with you, Timur.
I think that the ultimate intention of the US to keep its presence as much as possible because by keeping its military presence in the Kurdish-held territories, US can keep its position during the negotiation process and during the political resolution process, and it's crucial for the US.
Huseyin, why the mixed messages?
Actually, there are certain common messages and consistent messages that come from the American side. And that's the core American stance in Syria, which is keeping a zone of control in the east of Euphrates. So this message doesn't change across the people, across the units, across the bureaucratic organizations. But beyond that, any message, any delivered response, any kind of statement, we see vast differences across different speaking bodies. In this case, and that's not unique to the Syrian case actually, from the recent Qatar crisis to the many other issues from the North Korean crisis. The American state apparatus now have multiple voices.
I want to add on to your point, and this is a report from the United States, from the Overseas Contingency Operations Comprehensive Oversight Plan for the year 2018, and it states that the Department of Defense has requested $13 billion for ongoing operations against ISIS and building the capacity of the Iraqi security forces and vetted, quote-unquote, Syrian opposition forces and funding munitions to maintain the tempo of such operations. In addition to this, another $191.5 million has been requested for Syria for areas newly liberated from ISIS, which means money going to essentially the YPG. Timur.
So this proves my position that the US will keep its position, its presence as much as possible, because without its physical presence, US will be just sidelined from the negotiating process, and this is a disaster for the whole Syrian policy of the Americans.
Huseyin, I'll give you the last word.
I also don't expect the relationship between the United States and the YPG to end quite soon, because there's a mutual interest on the table there. The YPG needs America, otherwise without the American support, its primary enemy, Turkey, might intervene, and it might also have further troubles within Syria. For the American interest, the United States needs some ground forces, and they don't want to waste, they don't want to spend more money on that and more people on another war in the Middle East. So they need spearhead, they need the pound, the ground force, and they need that power to be a local force. And the YPG satisfies these two American concerns. So as long as we can see some other alternative groups in the east part of Euphrates, the United States will not cut its deals with the YPG. So can we see that change? Not likely, because the YPG itself prevented by deporting, by expelling the rival organizations in the region.
Fascinating power play. Thank you so much, Huseyin Alptekin and Timur Akhmetov, for joining us in the studio.